Hi, and welcome to Listen and Heal. In today's episode, we focus on relationships. A source of continuous personal growth and tender, heart-centered emotions, our most intimate of bonds get put under the microscope in challenging times. One of the most commonly discussed topics in relationship psychology is conflict management. Not surprisingly, it's also a most sensitive one, as it is in our human nature to fear or avoid it. But modern psychology looks at conflict as an opportunity to deepen our connections and to get to know one another and ourselves better. If you've ever been in a heated discussion with a loved one and found yourself with a strong urge to run away, you're not the only one. What you're coming face to face with is the anciently ingrained in our DNA fight or flight response. When triggered, it becomes easy for our fear to take over and for us to project our hurt on those nearest to us. But one thing's for certain, and experts agree, whether fighters or runners, single or married, 19 or 59, letting love in is essential for our well-being. Here today to help us form, keep, and navigate healthy relationships is leading relationship coach Valerie Greene. I sit down with her and with Boyd Meets Girl duo, our performers in today's episode. In addition to being beautiful and accomplished artists, Laura Metcalf Boyd and Rupert Boyd are also partners in life, making them perfect for this episode. Please welcome them as they treat us to the first musical selection.
Hi, we're Boyd Meets Girl. My name is Rupert Boyd.
And I'm Laura Metcalf.
And we're going to play for you an incredibly beautiful piece called Pavane by the French composer Gabriel Fauré. Now, he didn't write this piece for cello and guitar, and one thing that Laura and I did a few years ago was make this very arrangement. We were at a music residency in New Hampshire for a week, and one of our main projects while we were there was to make this arrangement. And this piece has been, one of your favorite pieces since you were a kid, right?
Yes, I remember playing it in youth orchestra and just falling in love with the tune. And it's been really cool to be able to perform our version of it all over the world.
And so we were at this residency. We had the full score for a complete orchestra and choir. I think there might have been a couple of maybe terse moments where we're wondering how to even read bassoon clef, things like that. Few words here and there, but eventually we got this arrangement together, which we're both pretty happy with. And then, funnily enough, later on we found out that Fauré actually wrote the piece for solo piano. Would have saved much time just to have worked from that version. But so here is our arrangement of Pavane by Gabriel Fauré.
Valerie Greene is joining us. She's a relationship coach extraordinaire, and be it that we have Boy Meets Girl featured in this episode, we thought it's perfect to talk about relationships. Valerie, my first question to you, and I'm sure everybody is wondering that, how has the COVID shutdown affected your practice?
Yeah, I mean, my practice is like, it's gotten so busy, which, I'm very grateful about, but obviously it indicates the challenges that most couples are going through right now, and singles. I mean, I do also work with singles, and their main challenge is, social distance dating, which is a whole animal in and of itself, right? People are being really creative. I mean, my take on that is that it has to go slower than usual. You don't have to worry about getting intimate too fast, and that actually allows you to get to know each other and build that emotional connection. But couples, I mean, there's two categories of couples that I work with too: pre-committed and married. And pre-committed couples in the beginning of a relationship are really challenged by being forced through quarantine to spend more time together than they would have otherwise. And so, not forced, but it's like, well, we just started our relationship, but there's quarantine, so why don't we quarantine together? And then you're kind of thrust into this close, intimate relationship without knowing each other all that well. And so it kind of exacerbates. I look at COVID as like a big magnifier. It magnifies both the good and the not so good patterns that, it brings all that stuff to the surface quicker. And so, my new relationship couples are struggling with, oh my God, like I didn't realize all my wounds and triggers would come up so quickly. And it's like, well, because you're spending so much time together. But of course, that's what I teach people how to work through. And then people that are married and living together, as me and my partner are, and both of you are, I really look forward to talking about how this manifests for all of us. But I mean, obviously, there's so much stress about spending all your time in the same place with the same person, and that leads to stress and boredom, even if your relationship is great. Extroverts are feeling frustrated that they don't have interaction with the outside, and then putting all of that pressure to connect on their partner, who might be an introvert and wants to go inward and wants space. And how do you get space if you're stuck in an apartment with this one person? And, also differences in how you're relating to COVID. Like people might have different, opinions on how much safety protocol to practice, and, they're fighting over that. And then of course, couples that are parents are having a lot of issues in how to have your kid at home and not leave the house, and how do you have enough alone time together as a couple. So, and then also just the fact that you're spending more time together is going to magnify whatever issues are already there between you.
Beautiful. Well, I'm excited to have you here because it sounds like you have the right tools and resources. So I'm going to turn over to Laura and Rupert and see if maybe they, as a married couple, have a question for you.
Of course.
Yeah, I mean, kind of like all the things that you just identified are the things that we would want you to talk about. We've been married for almost 5 years, correct? 5 years, and over a lot of our marriage, we've spent a lot of time apart because we're both touring musicians. Sometimes we tour together, but we do spend a lot of time apart. We're in normal life very, very busy and always running around. And in the last 4 months, we've just been spending every single second of every day together. And
yeah.
Do you have suggestions on how to keep a relationship healthy and happy? Just like when you don't have you're not seeing anyone else except for this person. And in our case, our almost 2-year-old.
Quality over quantity. So that's the question. If you only have 5 minutes to go deeper, or you only have 5 minutes to do something just for pleasure, because I do think that's also important. Like after he goes to bed, how could you make the most use of, the time that you have to be more creative about, let's say setting up, because part of what David and I have done, because usually, I do value him being the masculine partner who takes me out on dates, and he values that too. But obviously we haven't gone out. So it's one of the distinctions that I teach in my coaching is needs versus strategies. Right. So the need is like for me to feel swept off my feet by him. And, he likes that. And the strategy is going out. Right. But like there's many other strategies. And so we've gotten really creative about that. Like we've had like role play nights where we dress up in costumes and, relate to each other from those places. That's really fun. We have, where we read to each other, which is really, sweet. I know that not everyone enjoys that. I think even if you're just watching TV, you could have a deeper connection about like, what character did you identify with most? And, like what, like from that TV show, like what desire do you have about what we could bring into our life more? So it's all about the creativity. And so the question is, how could you, even if you only have the time after, your son, right? You have a son, right? Yeah. Sorry. After he goes to bed, like, how could you inject more creativity and fun and playfulness into it?
Has there been something you found, Laura and Rupert, that worked so far, aside from this precious time during his nap?
After he goes to bed, we've sort of settled into a routine where somebody makes dinner and then we enjoy dinner together and have some wine and, listen to music. And we've been watching Schitt's Creek. We've been watching an episode of Schitt's Creek every night, but Rupert falls asleep.
Yeah, sure.
1 minute in or like 10
sometimes 5 minutes in.
So I don't know if talking about the episode.
Yeah, right.
Like, actually,
totally.
Our has been like I tell Rupert what happened in the episode
the next day
because he fell.
Yeah. Although that could be fun, but I understand that like you want different activities to do together. I don't know, maybe, it makes sense that you would fall asleep if you've been working really hard and you're just relaxing in that moment. And of course we all need rest and relaxation, but I guess the question is, what could you do that's more active so that you feel more connected with each other? And
we've been doing yoga. Like I started doing yoga every day at the beginning of the pandemic. I've never been a yoga person, but for whatever reason, it was like the only thing that made me feel better. Like at the beginning of this, it was like, it helped my mood. It just helped, like my body felt good. And so like, I convinced Rupert to start doing the yoga as well. So the same like online teacher or whatever, he's been doing those videos, but again, we do them separately because, we just don't really, well, first of all, we only have one yoga mat, but just sort of the timing, usually it's like one person's making dinner while the other person's doing yoga or something like that. But maybe we could try to do it together. He's a little bit behind me in his progression on his yoga.
Practice routines.
Catch up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've done
Yeah, or I mean, you can, do it at a lower level if you want to do it together. And I am a trained yoga teacher, so I mean, you could do yoga on a carpet. It doesn't have to be a yoga mat.
Yeah.
As long as you vacuum the carpet. But I mean, that could be a fun way to connect. There's an exercise that David and I tried recently from another relationship coach, Layla Martin, and it's really simple. It's just asking, each partner shares for 5-10 minutes, what do you desire next in your life? What are you scared of? And, you're encouraged to go deep. Like I shared that I was scared of, growing old together and having to be his caretaker one day, because that's what my mom's going through. I mean, it's like, it's heavy stuff, but like, it's like you really open up about what your deeper fears are. And then what do you love the most about the other person? And, to talk about that for a few minutes. And I found it surprisingly deep. Like we actually really felt more deeply connected because we do talk about that kind of stuff on a regular basis, but not with like 10 minutes each to really go deeply into those questions. And afterwards we just felt really connected. And the other person doesn't do anything but listen. And, of course they can share what comes up for them if they want. But I mean, even just exercises like that, asking each other deep questions, can help you to get to know a deeper part of each other than you might have known otherwise.
That's a great idea.
That's really beautiful. And going along with that, as people are spending all this time together, like you mentioned earlier, difficult issues will come up. What is a good way? You know what I'm about to ask you?
Yeah, and of course I love talking about this.
Yes. What is a good way to come face to face with a conflict without hurting the other person, and knowing that you will just get through this, knowing that you cannot just leave the house and go have a beer somewhere and
right, exactly. Yeah, exactly. I mean, and there's so much that I have to say about this. So basically, I have a mindset shift about conflict because most people avoid conflict because they look at it as like pointing fingers at each other. And so there's basically two mindset shifts that I have about that. Number one is that conflict is an opportunity to get to know each other's deeper needs and deeper values, because conflict is always caused not by what it seems like on the surface, like meaning, let's say you have a fight about COVID, about one person, really being strict about quarantining packages and washing vegetables, and the other person not caring. I see that happen a lot. And so it's about really going deeper and asking, like, what are you scared of happening if you get it? Like, what does that mean for you? Like, what does that bring up for you? Why is that important to you? What's the value underneath? And the value is something like safety and security. And then the other person, like, what do they get out of having this attitude of, it's not that bad? Like, what is their reality? What value is underneath? Is it acceptance? Is it optimism? Is it intuition? They're tapping into their intuition about what's right. And so really getting to a deeper level in that conversation about needs and values can really, like John Gottman, who's one of the most prolific relationship researchers, who's written 20 books or something. He studied couples over almost 40 years about what makes couples stay together and break up. And he has an intervention called dreams within conflict. And I use that a lot with the couples that I work with. And it's basically getting like, what is the dream that you have, that you want, that you desire underneath what it is that you're fighting for? So instead of blaming the other person for not agreeing with you, really getting in touch with staying in your own, here's the dream. The dream is that I follow my intuition and I don't use rules to make up what's safe or not. Like, I'm really in touch with what's in the present moment. Like, that might be the person who says that they want to follow less protocol. And what's the dream underneath the person that wants to be safer? Like, is it that you stay healthy so you can serve others? Why is it important to you so much to serve others? Why, like, what is your ultimate dream? What is your ultimate vision with that? And once couples can actually hear each other on a deeper level about what's the dream and what's the value underneath, there's always a solution that works for both people once you feel like you're on the same team. Like, I want to support your dream, you want to support my dream. How can we have both? The way that I look at it, and this also comes from Gottman, because I take my interventions from so many different teachers. He has this analogy that I love, that's the white of the egg and the yolk of the egg. And the yolk of the egg is what you're not willing to compromise on. Let's say the person who has the strict protocol is not willing to compromise on quarantining packages because that just makes them too scared. So then you would ask a question of, like, what comes up for you? What is that fear about? Like, really kind of getting deeper. But they are willing to compromise on other things. And then the other person's not willing to compromise on following their intuition, but they are willing to compromise on following a little bit more protocol than what they normally would. And so you can really find this win-win solution by compromising on the white of the egg, but not the yolk of the egg. And that way you feel like your dream is really being honored. So, I mean, that's the general formula for the, I call it the win-win solution exercise, although I forget what Gottman calls it, but I take a lot of it from him. And I mean, I draw in a lot of other elements. The second element that I really use with conflict is recognizing all of us are made up by parts. Like right now, the part I'm embodying is like the educator part. But then when I'm at an online dance party, I have my fun, playful part come out, and when I'm, interacting with David and he's seducing me, I have my like feminine, sensual part come out. And so all of us have different parts. And the thing is that when we're triggered, we go into, all of us regress to more of a childlike state. Like when I feel scared, and it's just because our brain goes into fight or flight. And what happens when we go into fight or flight is the blood drains out of our thinking brain into our amygdala, and which is the fight or flight. It's the part of your brain that governs fight or flight. So all the blood drains into your hands so you can fight, and your legs so you can run away, and you feel like this person's the enemy. Right? Like, it's just, you're primed for that. And what we need when we're in that space is to have that recognized, like that, emotionally we are like a 2-year-old. And your parents of a 2-year-old, so you know that what a 2-year-old needs when they're having a temper tantrum is empathy and boundaries. Like not that you're going to let him get whatever he wants, but mirroring back to him what his feelings and needs are. Because that's how children learn. And when we're in that regressed state, that's what we need too. It's like our brain is like a 2-year-old. And so if I'm screaming and I'm like, you idiot, how could you do this? You're such a, like, actually what I need is for him to be like, you're really angry with me. And you seem really triggered. And actually, like, I really want to know what you need that you're not getting. But like, I can't really listen to you when you're yelling at me. Would you be willing to lower your tone of voice and tell me what you need? And so it's like, that's what the person needs. They need eye contact, soothing touch, and curiosity and empathy. And so whatever is coming out of their mouth is not really what they mean when we're triggered. And so I've seen it again and again. Like, I mean, when I'm really angry and David holds space for me, like as if I was a child, because I'm not saying that we need to be our partner's parent. But when that's the part that's coming up, if we judge it, like, you're being so immature, like, obviously that's not going to help. And that's what a lot of people do. I mean, I'm guilty of that. I used to do that. But when he's angry or when I'm angry and like we respond with judgment or defensiveness, then we just start fighting. But if we look at conflict, like, okay, this person is acting immature because they're triggered. And what do they need when they're triggered is they need soothing, they need curiosity, they need empathy. And like when he responds that way to me, I instantly calm down, and then I don't see him as the enemy, because David and I both value personal growth, for example, that we look at conflict as an opportunity to grow together, to discover more about each other, to learn more about each other's needs. And our biggest conflict is actually not really about anything that we disagree about, although, I mean, we've only been living together for 2 years, so I'm sure there'll be stuff that comes up that, but it's really about how we regress when we're triggered, because I tend to be blaming and he tends to be defensive. And and obviously 90% of the time when I'm triggered, I can share my feelings and needs. And that's what I teach, is like how to share your feelings and needs in a way that turns the other person into an ally. And I can give a demonstration of the difference, if you want, between like blaming versus sharing that turns your partner into an ally. But when I do that, then it's not an argument. Then we just collaborate and find a solution together. But when I blame him, then when he gets defensive, we're off to the races fighting until we recognize it. And then we use one of the tools that I teach to get back to a place of connection. And then we always work it out. But that's our main cycle. And so what I teach couples is to identify the cycle. What cycle do you get caught in? That's ours. Like, I'll blame him, he'll get defensive, then I'll blame him for being defensive, then he'll get defensive about being defensive, and then we're just arguing. And each couple has their own cycle. And so what I teach couples to do is to see the cycle as the enemy, and you to even label it. And this comes from Susan Johnson, who founded Emotionally Focused Therapy, which I was also trained in. It's seeing the cycle as the enemy and actually naming the cycle and pointing it out when it happens. Like, oh, there's the blaming defensive cycle. That's what we call it, although I encourage couples to come up with more creative names. But as soon as we name it, then all of a sudden we're like, how can we fight that instead of fighting each other? Like, oh, we fight that by getting vulnerable and talking about how I'm feeling, and then asking him to validate how I'm feeling, and then like coming up with like asking him how he's feeling. And sometimes, I don't like to stereotype, David doesn't mind talking about his feelings, but some men don't want to talk about their feelings. But then when I coach women, I teach them to ask a man, like, to share her feelings, and then ask him what he thinks about that, or what's going on for him, or what's this like for you, or what, how are you doing in the moment, something like that. But to really to go deeper and to find what it is, that deeper desire, that deeper dream is, and the deeper value that you both care about. And then how do you find the yolk of the egg and the white of the egg and create that compromise?
So next we're going to play Beyonce's Pray You Catch Me from her album Lemonade of 2016. I have been a huge fan of Beyonce for quite some time now, and I managed to convince Rupert to work with me on one of her songs. We selected this song. It's a really, really beautiful song. It's about her suspicions around her husband's infidelity. It's sort of, she's hiding in the shadows and peering around corners. And it's a very emotionally charged song, but it's also really, really heartbreakingly beautiful. We had to do a lot of work on it to make this very sort of layered pop tune work on our acoustic instruments. We actually ended up rearranging the structure of the song. So if you know the original tune, it's definitely going to sound very different to you. But we sort of conceived it as a work of chamber music so that we could play it on the concert stage, and people who had never heard this Beyonce song or any Beyonce song could enjoy it just as well. So this is our version of Pray You Catch Me by Beyonce.
Now, I'm very glad Laura brought up yoga, because I have a question for you, Valerie, that yoga sort of fits very well in. What part does mindfulness play in
Mm-hmm.
staying more connected through these challenging times and developing deeper connection, and yet finding the individual space that each of us needs to continue our growth?
That's such a good question. And yeah, I mean, I'm curious to hear what both of you think too. But yeah, I mean, I feel like at least for us, mindfulness is really key. And
Yeah.
I do notice that with my clients that, I mean, because a lot of people have a misunderstanding of what mindfulness is. They think that mindfulness meditation means you're supposed to quiet your mind. And if you can't quiet your mind, you're not good at it. And that's
Right.
actually not what mindfulness is. Mindfulness is cultivating the part of you that is this non-judgmental witness observer
Yeah.
to what's happening, and identifying as that's who I am. I am this non-judgmental, curious, compassionate witness that's witnessing everything else that's going on inside me. And when you can do that, it really works wonders in relationships, because if you can reach that mindful state, and that's why I'm saying, I mean, David, I think, would agree that that 90% of the time I am able to show up when I'm triggered as being vulnerable and saying, hey, I need you to hold space for me. I'm feeling angry, or I'm feeling sad, or I'm feeling upset, or scared, or whatever. It's because of mindfulness. Because the first voice that comes up in me is not the vulnerable voice, right? The first voice that comes up in me is the voice that wants to blame him and be like, how could he be so incompetent and unobservant, and how could he not know what I need, and he must not care about me, and blah blah blah. Even though we have such a great relationship, that voice is usually the first one, and if I act out of that,
Yeah.
then obviously that feeds the cycle. So mindfulness is what allows me to recognize, oh, that's interesting, there's that voice coming up again. I'm identifying that as my inner critic, and how does my inner critic want me to be with him or her, depending on how the energy feels at the moment. Where do I feel that in my body? Can I take some deep breaths and get curious about what my inner critic is feeling and needing, and how old is that part of me? Because usually that voice, at least for me, is like a teenager. It's a teenager, and it actually wants to blame my dad for being so controlling, and so then I might let it vent. I might journal about, like, that's actually what it's about, because that's the other secret, is that we project our unresolved childhood stuff onto our parents. I mean onto our art. See what I even just made a Freudian slip there, right? I project my dad onto David.
Right.
When I'm triggered, I think David is my dad. I mean, my subconscious mind does, and then I just let all my anger out at my dad,
Yeah.
at David. But when I have mindfulness, I could actually recognize, oh, that's a part of me, and that's my inner critic, or that's my inner child. How old does that part of me feel? And then I'll actually journal about how angry I am about my dad, or not me, because I feel like I have resolved a lot of that stuff, but like my inner child might not have, and she has something she wants to say, and let her vent. But I recognize that that's not my mature adult self. That's, a less mature part of me. And I wouldn't recognize that if it wasn't for mindfulness.
Yeah, I've been for several years meditating for just 20 minutes every day. I still feel very much a novice at meditating, but everything you say just resonates with what I'm learning through that experience.
Yeah. I mean, do you want to say more about that? Like, have you noticed that some part of your mindfulness practice has translated into showing up with more presence when you're in conflict?
I guess a little, but I still do feel as a novice very much training, because I notice things, but kind of a little bit too late.
Sure.
We're all guilty of that.
Yeah, especially after we have a realize, oh, if only I had been able to just step back for a second there, I would have. But yeah, I don't know. I definitely feel, in terms of getting through the past 4 months, that the meditation has been very important for me. That just 20 minutes, and hopefully in the morning, 20 minutes of meditating does make me feel just a little sort of more calmer and able to experience this lifestyle that we have with just a little bit more ease than otherwise I might have.
Yeah, absolutely. You two always look so perfectly in harmony with each other. I am not worried about the two of you, but by the same token, knowing that you have been cooped up together for 4 months makes me wonder what your secret is.
Well, I mean, there's a few things. One is definitely, I think our son has managed to kind of keep a focus for us going, because otherwise I think we could be despairing about our careers, both freelance musicians. Our careers are basically non-existent right now. So the focus of raising a kid has been great. The other thing too, like if this had have happened say 4 or 5 years ago, we were used to like going out every night or traveling to places like India and Nepal and Japan and traveling around the world. Whereas once we had our son, we've had to be a little bit sort of quieter in general. We've spent a lot more time at home together and a lot more time cooking. We still were able to travel, but it was a slightly quieter time, I think you would agree. So when this has come and we haven't eaten a meal that we haven't prepared in 104 days, and we haven't had anybody look after our son in 104 days, we're sort of a little bit more maybe accepting of the circumstances than we would have been some years ago.
Yeah, for sure. I feel so tenderhearted hearing that.
Any last questions, comments, anything you'd like to ask Valerie or Valerie for you to advise us, be aware of as we go forward, march forward through more COVID times?
Yes, I know. It's like there's really not a clear end in sight. I mean, one of the things that I just heard you speaking to so beautifully is that you're creating together this beautiful environment for your son. And I'm sure that you've talked about parenting styles and what you agree on, as how to parent him. And what I would say, both for families that have kids and families that don't have kids, that what really makes a relationship feel connected and inspiring is that you're creating something together. And so I know that part of what you're creating together is your work. And although what I heard is like the values and the closeness and the intimacy that you're instilling with your son as something that's bringing you closer together. And so for families that have kids, obviously he's 2, so he's not like really thinking about how to create something in the world. But for I mean, maybe he is. You can let me know. But for families that have older kids, to really choose shared values that you all inhabit together as a family. I know that Stephen Covey, the one who wrote 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, he has a book for families, the 7 Habits of Highly Effective Families. And the first thing that he asks families to do is write out a mission statement as a family. Like, what is it that we're creating together? Both with our shared values and also in the world. And values are things that make our life meaningful. Like some of the shared values David and I have are unconditional love. I mentioned personal growth. Collaboration is a big one, that there's always a way to find a solution that works for both of us if we dig deep enough, and that we're solving things together as a team. And those are just like wisdom and empowerment, and connection and community. Like those are some of our shared values. And to really articulate together, like, what is it that you're each doing on a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly basis to create those values more in the world. And if you have kids, you can come up with ideas together if your kids are older. If you don't, then sexual energy is creative energy, and so having a child is one way to use it. But if you're living together and you want to create something else, it's important for you to talk about what is it that we're creating in the world that's bigger than either one of us could do on our own. Because I do think that shared purpose is a huge motivator for couples to get out of their limiting patterns. Like I've actually worked with a couple once who recognized that they would fight as a way to create more passion, because like they had hot makeup sex, like they weren't doing that consciously, but like they recognized unconsciously that's what was happening. And then, like their passion can be created in other ways.
I'm so glad you brought that up, Valerie, because actually Laura and Rupert have a couple of projects together that I, as their friend and colleague, I'm very proud of. One of them is Gather NYC. I'm going to let them tell you about it, but I think they also just started something called Mindful Minutes. Am I correct about that? Would you like to tell us a little bit more about it? Both?
Yeah, so Mindful Minutes is the online version of Gather NYC. In normal times, Gather NYC is a weekly Sunday morning concert series every week at 11 a.m. for an hour. We have musical performances, we have short storytelling performances, and we celebrate a collective 2 minutes of silence at all the concerts. And before the concerts, we serve coffee and pastries and invite our audience to get to know each other. We try to cultivate a diverse and welcoming community for the concerts. And since we were just about to start our spring season, like a couple days after everything shut down, so we had to cancel all of the concerts. We had like how many, 11, 12 shows lined up, and we canceled all those. So we've been struggling to try to figure out a way to bring it online. And just a couple of weeks ago, we kind of settled on the solution of Mindful Minutes, which is like every couple of days we do a very short musical performance by one of our artists, somewhere between 5 and 15 minutes long, where the artist from their home shares some sort of music, something that means something to them. Our first several performances have been by this amazing pianist, Laura Downs, who's sharing music by Black composers that are inspiring to her. And we're developing more. We're just before the session working on a press release for our next 3 events. So it's been really good so far. It's still pretty new, this form, but it's a good way for us to keep our concert series going, and we're able to hire artists to make the little videos and keep the sort of ecosystem of performing arts and performing arts organizations going in our small way. So we're hoping to kind of build that project and use Milo's nap times as best we can to get all this done.
So now we're going to play a piece by Jaime Zeneman. This is the Vivissimo movement from his Reflexoist No. 6. It's a piece we discovered a couple of years ago, and he is a Bolivian composer, but he's lived all over the world, and you can really hear that sort of international influence in his music. And the great thing about playing music by living composers is you can actually get in touch with them. So we wanted to let him know how much we were enjoying playing his music. So we wrote to him on Facebook because that was the only way we could find to contact him. And English is not his first language, so our conversation was mostly with emojis, but we understood that he was happy that we were playing his music, and we've continued to be in touch with him. I think he sent Rupert a piece.
Yeah, a few months ago, we did get his email address eventually, and a few months ago he emailed me out of the blue a brand new solo guitar piece.
So it's a nice ongoing relationship, but this is the Vivissimo from Reflexos No. 6 by Jaime Zeneman.
Whether in a relationship or not, how we treat each other is key. Mutual respect, kindness, and compassion are a necessity. Unfortunately, there are still far too many hate crimes happening in the world today. In honor of all victims of hate crimes, a large portion of this episode's funding will be donated to the Challenge Accepted and Women Supporting Women movement, originated in Istanbul, Turkey. Donations will also be made to the Women for Women International and to the Loveland Foundation. Thank you for being with us today. Please consider making a tax-deductible donation through Fractured Atlas to Listen and Heal by going to our website or our YouTube channel. Thanks to your generous support, we can continue hiring talented artists in need of work and provide more healing for them and you. Thank you for being with us.